To defeat Nazism in World War II, nothing less than a massive assault on its home base, Germany, on the country at the heart of Nazism's support and export was necessary. The same applies to Islamic fundamentalism. And the Germany of Islamic fundamentalism is not Afghanistan or Iraq. It is Iran. Iran, as everyone in Washington knows, is the birthplace in 1979 and the center of the modern Muslim fundamentalist movement. That is why Iran has much greater ties with all the terrorist groups than the secular Hussein regime ever did. And why Iran, by the admission of our own State Department, is the worst country in the world in this respect. In other words, it's incomparably more active than Iraq in turning out, supporting, arming, and exporting terrorists. Iran, too, is a brutal dictatorship, and it, too, is working feverishly and even more effectively in some respects than Iraq was to stockpile nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction.
This is what makes Israel a moral country. It's pro-life, pro-freedom, pro-reason, essential nature. And this is also the reason for the fierce hatred against it. Israel must recognize the morality of its cause, the fact that it is the victim, that it is in the right. It must recognize that the current Palestinian leadership is evil, that it seeks death and destruction, that there can be no compromise with such men. Thus, Israel must cease all negotiations with the Palestinians. Compromise between the good and evil means that the good is sacrificed to the evil, that the innocent are bled to feed the guilty. We see the consequence of such compromises daily in the blood that flows in Israel's streets. Israel must recognize its right to defend itself. In this conflict, it is acting in self-defense against a brutal enemy. It has the moral right and obligation to use whatever force is needed to quell the violence and neutralize the dangers from the Palestinians. One cannot reason with someone bent on a suicide bombing. One has to destroy him before he causes harm. The U.S. must allow and encourage Israel to destroy Palestinian terrorism once and for all. There is no way, I believe, to erect fences. It would be nice, but it's impossible. If they are that committed as to fly airplanes into the World Trade Center, if they are that committed that they are willing to walk into malls and blow themselves up or blow themselves up in buses, they will find ways to get around a fence. Because once you identify that appeasement only leads to more evil, that appeasing evil leads to more evil, that any compromise with evil strengthens evil. Once you acknowledge, once you recognize that, then you know that every act of appeasement is gone. You don't know the exact form the terrorist attack will happen. But we appeasing Iran today will lead to some horrific thing in the future. Can't tell you exactly what.
And yet there was a pretense that, well, just one more concession will lead us to a better solution. So that's sort of the theory, that you drop out the moral judgment from this kind of policy making. And in practice, what that means is you ignore the basic character and goals of the two sides. The PLO-Arafat axis and what became the PA, I think it's fair to say their goal is not a free society. The practice is that you encourage the more militant because that's what's rewarded, because the trade is not really a trade between equals anymore. It's not a win-win, it's a win-lose relationship. And I think the fairer term for that is not trade, but you could call it extortion.
After 9/11, and we at the Ayn Rand Institute, we argued this immediately after 9/11. The target, no matter what else you do in response to the attacks on US soil in New York and in Washington, the massive loss of life, no matter what else you do, you have to remove the Iranian regime. There's other things that could be done. Saudi Arabia is a huge problem, but the Iranian regime is the inspiration for Islamic totalitarianism. throughout the Middle East, and specifically in regard to viewing the US as an enemy. So Iran has been at war with the US for decades. After 9/11, the Bush administration did worse than nothing, because what you convey when you attack Iraq and you leave Iran alone, what you convey is that you're too scared, or you don't have the courage to attack the actual fountainhead of the attacks. And that over time will just say, okay, well, we can get away with it. And the Obama administration went on a whole apology tour through the Middle East that we're not going to do what the Bush administration does. Trump does basically nothing, has no policy. And then you get to Biden, who, as Nico said, wants to restart talks with Iran, and the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the chaotic nature of it, all that conveys is US weakness. Unfortunately, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a capstone on that. Really was our policy, that we have no idea what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, what victory would look like. And that's what has emboldened these enemies and these kinds of attacks.
It reminds me so much of pre-9/11, and I don't think it's imminent, because this kind of enemy is not that powerful and that competent. So it's decades of appeasement before 9/11. But what we're setting up now is, we're going back to that, and it's when you project out, it's going to be appeasement after appeasement, emboldening them, and you could see in 20, 25 years a second 9/11.